Welcome to The Left Unsaid, the podcast that, of course, rips up the moldy ideological carpets, revealing the hardwood of enduring truths below. I'm Patrick McElwee, your host, and I'll be joined in this episode by Megan Finn, my wife and son. And I'm really excited to bring an interview with guests we had on the last podcast, Steve Woolford, Lenore Yarger, and their son Quinn, because they run a GI Rights Hotline and really have an inside look at what's happening inside the ranks of the troops that are being called on by President Trump to go to Los Angeles and now to the nation's capital of D.C. to take over policing. I think you're going to find that interview really interesting. We're currently bringing this podcast to you about every other week over the summer as we continue to work on a documentary in the background. If you'd like to support the continued work of this podcast, we're looking forward to bringing you weekly episodes again soon. You can, of course, go to theleftunsaid.net. If you're able, we definitely would welcome any financial contribution you can make, since we currently have no way of sort of sustaining this work. If you can't contribute financially, that's, of course, completely fine, but we would really appreciate it if you shared with your friends, if you left us a rating or review wherever you happen to be getting this podcast. And by the way, you can get this podcast wherever you listen, including on YouTube. So we're going to go back to our friends who are longtime peace activists who started a Catholic worker house in rural North Carolina. We're going to get a report from that rural area of North Carolina that's experienced pretty rapid demographic changes due to immigration and various political efforts to unify against hate in that community over the years. But again, in the context of Trump's takeover policing in D.C., we're going to get a view from the inside. Steve and Lenore, for the past 20 years, have run a GI Rights Hotline, and they had their busiest week ever as the National Guard troops were sent to Los Angeles. To support ICE operations there. So we're going to hear from Steve and Lenore about the reasons that soldiers have been trying to get out of the military service. If you know somebody who's in the military who would like to get some advice about the possibilities they have to resist illegal orders, or perhaps to get out of the military, you can call their hotline at 877-447-4487. Okay, here's the interview. So in preparation for this, before y'all came, when we knew you were coming, so I did a little reading on you, and I decided to pull up the weekly rag from the Triangle, North Carolina here, the Indy Week. And you've been all over the place in the Indy through political exploits. I want to hear about the GI Rights Hotline, which you all have dedicated the last 20 plus years to working on helping GIs who need advice at difficult moments. But going way back to like the year 2000, I think, Lenore, is the first time that you showed up in the local newspaper for hosting a unity walk. After this guy, people might not remember him, David Duke, former Grand Wizard of the KKK, turned Democratic politician, turned Republican politician, who hosted an immigration rally in Siler City here in North Carolina. And it seemed like the thrust of that back in 2000 was an appeal to black residents of North Carolina. Let's unite, white and black, against the immigrants and kick them out. So I saw you had organized that. I don't know. It just seems to me, given the current political moment, that David Duke was sort of like this proto-Trump. You know, he was articulating a form of politics that now is in the White House, that just passed this huge budget bill, billions of dollars to deport people nationwide. Kind of a little, maybe not a private army, but certainly a David Duke-style police force.
I think at a time when it was a lot less common and maybe less safe to say more overtly racist things, David Duke was proud of it. And I mean, even he maybe toned it down different times for different audiences. I mean, now there's a whole lot of right-wing hate speech out there that's pretty extreme. And I think he was definitely I don't know if I'd say pioneer, because he was following in a tradition ahead of him. But Siler City is a largely immigrant city because of chicken processing plants that were there. And so a lot of immigrants came mostly from Mexico and El Salvador, most of them undocumented. And what would usually happen is you'd have like the anchor person who would come and set up a place. And then maybe they bring over a brother, and then people started bringing over wives. People started bringing kids. And people also started having kids who were now citizens in the community. And people also expanded, even I think at that time David Duke came, beyond just working in the chicken factories. Now people were working construction. They were doing landscaping. They were doing other stuff out in the community. And so I think there were people in Siler City that remembered not too far back when this was a white community. And all of a sudden, the Latinos were, I don't know if I would say dominating the community, but they were a huge part of the community life. And their culture was coming into the community. Their stores were coming into the community. They were in the churches. And
it's a small place, right, Steve?
It's a pretty small place.
Are we talking thousands or less than 10,000?
Today it says 7,000.
Is that all? Like, I was going to guess 10, but a huge percentage of that now are immigrants. Quinn went to high school there, and his high school, I think, is about 70% Latino right now. And then the rest is maybe half black, half white.
So it was like a community then at the time that David Duke is showing up that was undergoing a big change due to immigration.
Already had been going. And I think what's interesting, like after that happened, we just had this opportunity that there was an annual pilgrimage for peace and justice that went through communities during Holy Week. And they were coming to Siler City that year because David Duke had been there, and they asked us, let's organize something. So I got together with some local pastors and some other community members, and we pulled together this march, this unity march. And I hadn't seen anything like that in Siler City before that. But as, you know, looking back just to 2020 when Trump got elected, really quickly there was organizing, and there was a formation of this group called the Community Organizing for Racial Equity that has pulled together white people and people of color to think about racial equity. We did a lot of Racial Equity Institute trainings when it was first forming, but now we're still just trying to think about equity and how we can create a more equitable society. There's this, constant presence of this unified effort to stand together in solidarity and to organize against some of the things that are happening now. And that started during, his first election. I think over time, the community and the whole county has really kind of come together.
But there were growing pains then, and there's still some growing pains now, especially with people who were part of this community when it looked a whole lot different and maybe had a different sense of their role and importance in the community than what they have now.
And I do think that, like, back in 2000 when David Duke was saying those things, it was shocking, and it was rightly seen as out of right field and out of the mainstream discourse. Whereas now it's sort of come all the way in. And I think, like, those of us living in it, maybe day to day, don't recognize just how extreme the positions are that have become normalized.
Yeah.
Right. And I think there's a thing that people from that position didn't explain then and didn't really explain now, or are only starting to, which is, if you're pro-economy, you can't really be anti-immigrant in the United States, because immigrants are just doing a huge part of the work, and especially jobs that in a lot of cases nobody else wants to do. I remember some years back talking to dairy farmers in North Carolina. I talked to a dairy farmer who was saying, there's no way my farm could survive without that immigrant labor. Those people are great. And this was around 2015. He said he was going to vote for Donald Trump. And he said none of the other farmers around him could survive. But he was a Republican, and they were Republicans, and they were and no one seems to be able to reconcile this idea of, what happens after you kick out all the people who do all the work. Like right now, if a tree falls on your house, a roofing crew is going to come in. It's probably going to be, immigrant labor that's repairing your house. And I'm not sure who's going to do it if, you kick them all out.
And you can see this contradiction within the Trump administration. I mean, you see the farmers have gone to Trump and said, hey, we need this labor. Like, in the end, they want to make their money and they need the labor to do it.
It's a very confused position if you're, like I say, if you're pro-economy. Like, I mean, if you go to our Walmart, if you kick out all the immigrants, you'd only need a third the size of the parking lot because that's who the shoppers are that are bringing all the business in. There's so many aspects of it that, are just completely dependent on the immigrants in the community.
Yeah, I mean, you risk having something like, like what Japan is seeing right now. Japan is like, it's some people classify as an ethno state, has very tight restrictions on immigration, stuff like that. And they're right now they're feeling the pains of that. They have a shrinking population. It's projected to be hard on their economy. Has been hard in certain areas and sectors. Their social safety net, it's been hard on that. And we're not only trying to cut off immigration so it'll be that way in the U.S. in 20 or 30 years. We're trying to actively deport all the people that are already here. So we want that to be now. So even if you're completely devoid of morals and don't care about the people that are here, it's going to hurt you anyways.
So, Stephen, Lenore, maybe you can talk a little bit about what's gone on with your work through this GI Crisis Hotline and how things have shifted for you and what exactly happened during your busiest week ever.
So we work for a nonprofit called Quaker House, which is out of Fayetteville and started during the Vietnam War when a conscientious objector hitchhiked to Chapel Hill and asked the Friends meeting there, the Quaker Friends meeting, to support him in his conscientious objection to war. And so the Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill Friends meetings got together and started Quaker House, which is now in Fayetteville.
Which is where Fort Bragg is.
Right.
Well, I'm not sure if it's currently Fort Liberty or back to Bragg. I know it's going back. It's flip-flopped. I didn't know if it's officially back. Anyway,
is that because
I digress.
Bragg is a Confederate general, right? So they're...
Yeah. But now
supposedly it's a different Bragg.
Now they've named it after some enlisted Bragg no one ever heard of.
An obscure Bragg.
Yeah.
The Quaker House kept working with conscientious objectors after the Vietnam War, but also started helping anyone in the military who wanted to get out. And in the 90s, we banded together with a couple other organizations around the country to start the GI Rights Hotline, which is a toll-free number that anyone in the world or a country can call. Mostly our calls come in from military members or their families, and they're looking for help getting discharged from the military or dealing with grievances and complaints within the military system. We also talk to people who are AWOL about how they can resolve their situation. We're not attorneys. We're mostly information providers. Our goal is to empower the person in the military to make the best decision for themselves. The military is, as we know, is a very top-down hierarchy. When you're in the military, you don't get to think very much for yourself. You're always told what to do and what to think. And so our counseling that we do is really just giving information so that we can empower the person on the other end of the call and is to make the best decision for themselves.
Well, it seems like such a powerful way to intervene from an anti-war perspective in the society that's so militarized, with so much worship of the troops, with so much worship of the veterans, but that being contingent on them obeying the military structure and so on. I mean, I remember early in the Iraq War, maybe around 2005 or so, there was this great documentary, Sir No Sir, about rebellion in the military, and it just seems so fruitful in terms of resisting empire and resisting the militarization of everything.
And it doesn't come without consequence. So part of our job is to help people understand what they might be facing depending on how they might resist, and to also just show them legal channels so that they don't have to get in trouble but can still get out if that's what they want. So that's what we do. So
you started doing this 20 some years ago, and you just recently had your busiest week ever?
It turns out.
Okay, what happened?
So you all might remember, well, there's a couple things that happen. I think that Donald Trump is probably the first, you all are historians, so you may know this better than I have, but he is the first president I know of who started threatening to use the military in ways it's never been used, like against domestic enemies and things like that. So I will say there were heightened concerns among the community and even amongst people in the military.
Maybe like somewhere with the acronyms LA.
Okay, right. So
comes to mind.
So this had been building for a while, but then with the deployments to LA, that was the week where things got really busy. And I think we had a few categories of calls that week. There were people in the military who felt like this is not at all what I signed up to do, especially National Guard members being called up. And they'd explain this in different ways. Some of them would say, look, I'm ready to fight to defend our country if some other country attacks us. I will, I'm willing to use lethal force. I'm willing to, be part of, planes and bombs and everything else. So there were people who aren't necessarily anti-military people at all, but they felt like, I am not okay pointing a gun at my fellow citizens. That is not national defense, especially if it looks like they're doing something like free speech, constitutional free assembly or something like that's just not what I'm here for. And you all may remember after George Floyd was killed, there was a moment that was similar when National Guard troops were called up to DC to police Black Lives Matter protests. And there were people then who said, I'm just not going to do this. And you can't tell everybody's race by their voice, but you get a pretty good idea if you're hearing people. I'm sure they can tell my race too.
We'll leave it to our podcast listeners.
There you go.
Submit in the comments your best guess as to Steve's race.
What I would say here, though, is not what everybody would guess. It was not just people of color who were opposed to going to D.C. armed against Black Lives Matter protests. There were a lot of people that sounded like white country boys that that's not what I signed up to do. And that ended pretty quickly. You all might remember it was over fast, whereas I think this was longer. So there was a category of people that just felt like this isn't what I signed up for. This isn't defense. This is aggression.
It felt like in the first term, there were other people in the White House who had sort of been assigned to tend Trump, and they tamped it down, whereas now he feels like Trump's a little bit more unregulated and unhinged.
So another kind of sentiment people expressed was, I'm really concerned that this country might be moving away from what I think of as a democracy into something that looks more like a dictatorship. I don't know if those are exact words, but that's what they were getting across. And I don't want to be part of that. If somebody's ordering me to do something, like I don't want to be part of martial law. I don't want to be part of the military cracking down on citizens. I want to defend a constitutional democracy. That's what I'm here for, even if I don't agree with the people. So that camp was maybe just a little different. Then another version of the calls were people, California is a state with a lot of immigrants, and the military, not everyone realizes how many immigrants are in the military. You need to have a green card to join the military. You don't even have to be a citizen.
Yeah, in my high school, they have big banners that it's like, do you have undocumented family? Join the military and we'll help you.
Right. They advertise that at times. So the fact that these particular LA deployments were connected to ICE raids for some people were even more problematic. Some people just don't believe in deporting people, but a number of people spoke specifically of, look, country is high for me, but family is number one. And this is like, I have family members that ICE would be going for, and I'm not going to go help them. People talked about an immigrant spouse or immigrant uncles or brothers and sisters or things like that. And they wanted no part in going into the community and rounding up, their relatives or people just like their relatives that didn't seem to them to be a threat to defense. They weren't doing anything criminal. They're, parts of the economy like we talked about before. So that was really upsetting to people as well. A second piece to this was there's a larger community of people very, very concerned about what's happening, and they are very involved in social media. And so a whole other wave of calls came from people that said, I saw this number on social media as the place people can call if they're being ordered to violate the Constitution. And I wanted to check and make sure you're real before I put this number online. I don't want to post this number without making sure this is real. And And there were a lot of versions. Some people would say, well, some people say you guys are the government. Some people say whatever. I just need to
they were like
verify this.
There were like little conspiracy theories starting.
Sometimes they were conspiracies. But a lot of people would say things like, I'm not in the military myself, but my son is, or my cousin is, or so-and-so. And I want people to get this number. And I don't know if they had a long conversation where the cousin's saying, yeah, give me that number. Or if maybe they want to be proactive and say, you shouldn't be doing this, and here's who you can call. There were so many calls. We didn't have time to even go into all of it. We would verify, yes, this, I confirm this is the number. Like, if is me answering it and telling you this is good enough? For most people, that was good enough. Someone to quiz us about what we do.
Is it at all the case that, do you think, these kinds of objections, and obviously you're hearing some fraction of them, actually limit what the National Guard say could do in its deployment in Los Angeles and California? Like, do you have a sense of how widespread these worries or these objections among the rank and file are? Do you think it has any like constraint on what the commanders can do and ultimately what the commander in chief can do?
Well, what I'll say here is, so if you're in the California National Guard and you don't want to be doing this, you're in a really confusing position, because the president or whatever, the federal government's saying this is totally legal. They're giving their justification for it. And your governor, you're in the state National Guard, sometimes you're under state orders, sometimes you're under federal orders. Your governor's saying this is illegal, and his attorney general is filing a suit in federal court. And the first judge that looks at it says, yep, it's illegal. So if it's got to be very unsettling for someone to not even know, are the orders I'm carrying out legal or not? And at the same time, there's a really big risk. If you want to say, I'm not doing this because it's illegal, I can't tell you how it's going to play out when it's all over. Like, I'd love to tell people, yep, no risk at all. You could just defy it and it's going to be illegal.
Yeah, and it depends so much on future politics and future political outcomes. You said something about the earlier troops on the other side who had refused to get the COVID vaccine under the Biden administration. Some of them were discharged, I think.
Right. A number of them were discharged. But then, the most recent thing was they lifted this and said, if you were kicked out for refusing a COVID vaccine, now you can come back in and it'll be reinstated, or your pay will be.
So you get paid for all the time you weren't there. And so it turned out that for those soldiers, a future political outcome that they couldn't have been sure was ever going to come, reversed things, and the Trump movement, for whatever reason, cared enough about a resistance to the COVID vaccine, of all things.
Or I would say, that's the first time I've ever seen troops defying direct orders, and feeling like they had the support of Congress, and later the backing of Congress in the reversal position. So, it's a big, if you're asking yourself now, is Trump going to turn around and say, if I refuse these orders, that I'm okay? Well, probably not.
And to answer your question about did it cause any restraint in how these troops were used, I don't think we know. I mean, from what I understand, the reports that have come back are that they haven't been doing much. But
some people even told me, some of our calls are from officers as well. Just because you're an officer doesn't mean you're not opposed. Also, a lot of them are bright, ethical people who are reading the news. And some of those officers I talked to told me that it looked to them like the National Guard was holding back even what missions it went on, and it was limiting what it had them do. And I think, this guy didn't say Kent State. Maybe he was younger than that. But what he was describing is they don't want a Kent State incident. They don't want to go out and get in trouble and do a bunch of stuff. They'd rather ICE go do the messy stuff, and they do the least amount, like ride this out and go back home. Was kind of, that was what everyday people there were thinking. They're sitting around kind of bored, but they'd rather be bored than carrying out ICE raids. And I think even, some of the officers said that went a lot higher up. People would rather not be part of what was happening and just stay out of trouble.
I saw they detained one guy and then didn't really do a whole lot more than that. Like, they stayed on kind of the federal building premises. They didn't do a whole lot of policing in the actual streets. That was mostly the LA police.
Yeah. And I talked to at least a couple people whose commands had really been sympathetic to their not wanting to participate and had helped them come up with other reasons to not go. So it's still kind of an unknown. And I guess they're halfway through it now. They've got another.
Well, they started, I think they're sending half the Guard members home and keeping the Marines. Originally, they talked about a 60-day deployment there. And people I talked to said it looks like they're setting up for the long haul. Like they're bringing in they have big tents with cots and contractors, and they were setting up, I think at first people were hoping for something like the George Floyd version of you're there for a few days and you go home. And a lot of people really had their fingers crossed. And then they're like, we're not going home yet. But now I think they're starting to send people home. But I heard they're still keeping the Marines there for a while.
And we never know, like, the long-term effects. Sometimes experiences like this will lead people to really rethink their whole role as a person in the military. And it's the same with the Palestine situation and what's happening in Gaza. I think sometimes there can be this trigger moment that just makes people really start to question not just, do I want to be part of supporting this particular situation, but can I do this in any situation? And those people we can really work with and help apply for a conscientious objection discharge, because they would meet the legal definition of being opposed to participation in any war they might be asked to fight. So I expect that we will hear from people even down the road who had this experience and that started this thought process for them.
And if anybody's listening out there who might find themselves in this situation, what's the number they should call?
877-447-4487. The website is GI Rights Hotline.org.
Yeah, but no need to call just to ask if you're real. They can just listen to this podcast.
That's right. It's real.
And when people call, we tell them they can be as anonymous as they want to be. You can call from somebody else's phone if you're afraid we're tracking the number. You don't have to give us a name. Sometimes we need to know, are you National Guard or active duty, just because it makes a difference in how they'll get treated in a situation. But we try to get the least amount of identifying information we would have to have.
One other thing you reported recently, I was wondering about an update on this, is it sounds like they've been holding on to people who might have been let go at earlier times, who are, say, going through some kind of mental illness, because they've been having trouble recruiting in recent years to the military. Do you still have a sense that that's current, that recruitment has been difficult for the military still, or have they solved that problem?
What we have seen is there's times when the military has plenty of people and it takes a lot less to get kicked out in terms of, say, medical limitations or something like that. And then there's other times when they're pretty desperate for bodies. And like, I remember during like 2011 and times like when they were sending tons of people to Iraq and Afghanistan, people had pretty major medical issues and they're like, cowboy up, you're going, or like there's guys like, I can't walk more than like 2 minutes. And they're like, there's going to be a shuttle over there. Like, you'll be fine. They would just disregard everything and send people. And I think at times we've done this, that pendulum swung one way and swung back another. And I would say currently it seems like they're trying not to lose people right now. I think numbers might be lower than what they want to have. But then you get situations where if you're transgender, you could be a high-performing service member, but you've got to be kicked out.
They're kicking you out.
Another thing that's going on right now is they've changed their beard requirements. Okay. And that sounds like a totally neutral thing, but there are people who have a skin condition that gets really aggravated when they shave. And it turns out a way higher percentage of them are African American. So if you're making people shave more, it's going to mean less people of color are going to be able to meet that standard and fit in the military. So there's things that seem really tiny and neutral when you hear about them that, I don't know, is it because of race? It looks like maybe it is. I don't know. They've got to be aware.
And it's crazy just how big the recruitment apparatus is for the military. I mean, Finn, you mentioned the banners in your high school. They're in all the high schools. And I think I came out of the tech world for a while, and I think it's well known that the Defense Department is funding all kinds of startups. But what kind of blew my mind is if you take, for example, a sports app that is designed so that high school athletes can showcase their skills and maybe get connected to recruiters for colleges. You think that sounds like a pretty benign app, not something the Defense Department is likely to get involved in, but they actually have a major interest in an app like that because what they're interested in is not those top tier athletes that are going to go to college, but they want the second tier guys who aren't necessarily going to have a big career, but might be a really good candidate for them to recruit into the military.
Yeah, and they have ads over, like, I'm getting my license this summer, and they have ads like all over the app that tracks your hours. Like, they just have everything when you're right at this age to try to hook you.
Quinn had some experience with this.
Is that right?
Well, yeah, I'd say, I mean, they're everywhere in school right now. Every one of my classes in high school, I've had many recruiters come into our classroom, and they always have the same kind of tactic of try and make it look like the military is your only option moving forward. Everyone always wants to hear about pay. Like, the recruiter will ask, what do you want me to tell you about? And they're always like, how much do you get paid, you know? And so what they'll do is they'll make a breakdown of the average income in Siler City, which is super low. It's like $30,000, maybe less. And they'll go through and they'll show you all your expenses and show you, wow, look, you've got $0 left. You have like not enough money to live on. What are you gonna do? And then they go around and they ask the people who are going to college in the room, like the seniors who are leaving, they ask them if they're going to college. And then when the senior says like that they are, they'll question them and they'll be like, well, how are you paying for it? And then when the student, if they say like, oh, I'm going into debt, they're going to use that as leverage to try and say, well, this is why you shouldn't go to college. Look, you're going to be in all this debt. And then they always segment that into how great the pay they make as a military recruiter, you know, look at all my benefits, look at everything I get, you know. So they try and it's really sneaky the way they do it. And then they always end by handing out a sheet to every student in the class. And they don't tell you it's optional. They just say, hey, fill this out. Everyone fill this out. They hand you a sheet. You look at the sheet, and I've been handed many of these sheets and just toss them to someone else. You know, I just give them away, and the recruiter will always walk up to you and they'll be like, "Oh, did you not get a sheet? Here, let me get you one." They'll put another sheet in front of you. You're like, "No, thanks. I'm not filling that out." And they're like, "Oh, well, I'm not going to use it for anything. I just want it on my, you know, just fill it out. You don't have to do anything with it." They're like, you can even check the button or the little box at the bottom that says, "I'm not interested. Don't contact me." And it's like, well, if it doesn't matter, why do I still have to fill it out? Why do you really want me to do this? So they really push for it in sneaky ways.
And I'm guessing you're not getting recruiters like that from colleges coming in and giving you that kind of treatment.
No.
And this is after I, as a parent, have signed forms saying I do not want my child recruited in this school.
They come into your classroom. The teachers disagree with it. Like I had I think it was maybe right after our AP exam. It might have been right before it though. But we were in the middle of like a review on our class material, and they came in and paused everything, you know, and took the rest of the class period to give their presentation. And colleges, all they get to do is set up like a table in the lunchroom that you can go up to if you want to. You know, you might have a college fair once a year, but those recruiters are there like at least once a month to find as many people as they can. I remember the Navy recruiter came in and he was like talking to this one kid. He's like, "Do you want to be a nuclear engineer?" And the kid's like, "Well," he's like, "I don't know." And he's like, "Well, you'll make this much money." He's like, "You'll get this huge signing bonus. It's like $80,000 signing bonus." He's like, "You can be a nuclear engineer." And they tell you like right off the bat, like you can be one, you know, this could be you, you know, but in reality, like very few of them will ever even get close to nuclear engineering, you know, like they will tell you that they've got a spot guaranteed for you. You're about to just sign this paper and get a signing bonus of $80,000. When in reality, I mean, it's just like they just want to convince you to sign their paper.
Well, we asked you to talk for us for half an hour. We've been here for an hour and 15 minutes. So
We're just getting warmed up.
Yeah, I'm going to hit record now. My favorite joke. Everyone loves that one.
We always do that joke at the end of the podcast. Welcome to the podcast experience. Now you've had the whole
That's
podcast.
the dad joke left unsaid. Well, if anybody has anything else you want to say, I know there's always more to say because the language is just like that. There's infinite permutations of the English language, but it may be time for us to cut our particular permutations off here unless somebody has something else to say.
Well, I will just say that prior to being a guest on The Left Unsaid, when I found out you all were doing this, I immediately subscribed, and I have listened to every podcast so far.
Oh, biggest fan.
You're like listener number 6.
It's a great show.
We've had hundreds of listeners. So.
I'm overwhelmed at how much work you all have to probably do to prepare. Or I don't know if you're just listening to news all day, every day, or you've got your own long life histories that you bring into everything. But it's a great show.
What we say every day, and we just hit record. But we appreciate you coming on. We appreciate you listening. We definitely appreciate the insights that you have shared with us today. This is we'd love to have you guys back on, make you friends of the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.